It's always fun to talk about, some of the work that we do to kind of like get a little bit of a peek behind the curtain when it comes to student crisis. And I think I think part of this is about, trying to figure out ways that we can work better together when we have a student in crisis. And I always like starting these conversations by saying a lot of this is an art, right? So it's not a science where I can tell you exactly what we would do in each particular such scenario, but it's more like an art that like we just get really good at, right? It's like practicing art, you get better and better at it as you try. And so, but the first thing we know about supporting students and working through these things is practice, right? Practice, understanding that our students are completely capable. We are not the people who solve their problems. We're the people that help them find resources to navigate their own solutions. And there are times where we might have to step up and do some administrative work. But again, those times are pretty rare and far between. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I have a little bit of a presentation today. And then I do want to spend some time at the end just kind of going through any general questions you might have following the presentation. And so, yeah, so give me a second while I get my screen up for you all. Okay, let's see. Okay, so can I get some thumbs up if folks can see my my screen? Okay, great. Yeah, so a little bit about the work I do for folks who aren't familiar, but I'm the Associate Dean of Students, and so my portfolio includes working with students who are in crisis. It'll involve basic needs, student support, but also prevention services. So part of my job is about helping students through crisis and helping staff build their skills and also align with some university, state, and legal requirements as we do so. So that's kind of like my role on campus. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the work I do collaboratively across the university at the end of the presentation. So I always like to start off with my sort of definition of crisis that I kind of lean on. But when we think about crisis is kind of an emotional and physical response. It's something that happens in people's day-to-day life that disrupts their sort of like normal functioning or normal day-to-day practices. And I always tell people, if you live, you've been in crisis. It's just part of who we are as people. It's part of the human condition. And so crisis is unfortunately normal to experience. It just might not be something that people are prepared for. And that's where we come in, is that we can help folks navigate through crisis that they may not have been prepared for, they might not be anticipating, they also might not be aware of how it's impacting them. And so our job is really to come in and sort of help them navigate through crisis, but just know that crisis is a part of being human. It's a normal part of our day-to-day. So impact of crisis is another thing we talk about. So crisis happens all the time. And depending on who the person is, they can experience that crisis very differently, right? So someone who might have had experiences in the past that either were traumatic or difficult to get through might have a different set of skills to actually manage a crisis versus someone who may have depended on their parents for a while for support, may have delegated their parents as the problem solver in their life. And now, again, they might not have the skills they need to actually move through and persist through the crisis. And so I always like to share the impact that I think about and I talk to them, but with my students is, what is their individual understanding of what's going on and how it has led to their inability to either resolve the concern through whatever coping mechanisms they develop. So again, to me, it's about perception of the event, again, whether big or small in my book, right? Could be a breakup, could be homesickness, it could be a death of a parent, lots of things on a spectrum. But again, it all depends on that person's perception of the event, but also again, do they have the ability to resolve that disruption based on their current coping mechanisms, or can we help them get the resources to develop different coping mechanisms? So when I think about crisis, oftentimes we're not the people who are inside of their head knowing every single thing they're thinking, but we can see things, we can hear things, particularly for students that we're pretty close to or that we have a good relationship with. But here are a few things that are causes for concern for us when we're thinking about working with students who are in distress and who might be going through a crisis that either they're aware of or unaware. And so we think about, we want to be paying attention to changes in academic performance. So again, if you have a student that you work with or you're teaching a class, that you notice a sharp decline in their academics, that might be cause for concern. Uncharacteristic changes in their attendance to class or in meetings that you might be hosting. So someone who is usually always on time, or just maybe a few minutes late, starts to not come anymore, changes their communication style with you pretty drastically from who you know them as. If you're noticing folks being in a depressed or lethargic mood, again, that we shouldn't be diagnosing these students, but we can all pick up as humans when someone's feeling down or someone's a little bit different than they normally have been with you. And so that's not necessarily cause for alarm, but it is cause for us to think about, again, what else is going on for that student at this moment in time. We can also look for, and this is pretty big in the beginning of the year, is hyperactivity or rapid speech. So these are typically signs of maybe a little bit of mania for folks who are bipolar. And so again, we're looking for folks who just can't sit still and they can't stop interjecting and they are sort of all over the place. That's something that we want to know and something that you should pay attention to as concern. The other thing that is that you all might see, particularly in our roles in student life, is social withdrawal. So folks who, again, are super engaged and want to lead everything, but all of a sudden they start to step away from their friend group, step away from other opportunities to connect with folks. Sometimes that can be a sign for us that we need to step in to help. Other causes for concerns that, again, either you might hear about or you might witness yourself, but again, some marked changes in the way they dress or the way that they're maintaining their hygiene. Changes in the way that they've eaten, or if you've noticed, that they don't seem to be staying awake in your meetings, or again, they're having a hard time making deadlines or showing up on time. Again, sometimes that can be connected to some other things going on in their life. So again, these are changes that we can see with our eyes and hear about through a conversation with the students or with other students. And then the last is sort of an unusual or exaggerated emotional response to events. So if there's a change you're making in your office, or you're talking to them about, something that you need them to work on, or, just anything that might just kind of be normal or routine, but they're having this exaggerated response. And exaggerated can be a loaded term, but we're talking about folks who might blow up at you because you've asked them to cover a shift, or you've given them a little piece of feedback and they're sort of like all over the place and they're not able to concentrate anymore. They can't focus on the feedback that you've given them because they're sort of reeling emotionally. These are the kind of things we want to kind of pay attention to as maybe causes for concern. Again, we all have experienced some of this in our lives, right? Where it's just a part of living. So not any one of these particular things are going to be the place where we stop and say something is absolutely wrong with this person. We have to get this person support and help. Some of these things just might be natural. There's a lot of times where we just might be sad, right? We just might be having difficulty keeping up with our own personal schedules. We might be transitioning from, again, particularly for this upcoming class, from being remote to being in person. Like, there's a lot of things that go on to that you just don't have to do when you're sitting in front of a screen. And so again, we probably will see a lot of these things coming back. And so not one of these things means that there's cause for concern. But again, if you're starting to see a pattern change and some of these things kind of show up, that's the place where we want to start engaging with the student. So I want to put up here, this is from our counseling services. And I think this is really important, a really important slide here to sort of explain a little bit of some of the common concerns that we see with our students. Being in college is hard. I think that's where we have to start, right? I think right when I was on the call, one of our colleagues was talking about, the complicated nature of being in school, right? And so, our students, sometimes we think, all they're doing is going to school, right? Some of them don't have full-time jobs, or some of them don't have part-time jobs. So again, we feel like, oh, it should be fine. But a lot of times, our students are walking in with concerns that they've had in high school, things that they might be very aware of, or maybe again, they come to college and new things kind of arise. But again, it's complete. Some of these things are completely, I don't want to say normal in the way that they're fine, but in a way that it should be normalized that these things occur naturally just by being on college campuses. So again, things that we deal with pretty frequently on our college campus, particularly within my office and also over in counseling services, is anxiety, depression, stress around your academics, difficult or unexpected life experiences. This is a pretty big one for our incoming students. Cultural identity, so coming in with the background, politics and so the social climate is really tense. So again, we have folks who are going to be, taken out of their home environment and placed in this sort of, I like to call it like a petri dish of culture, right? And so sometimes that can be really complicated for folks to navigate. We see students who walk in with trauma, but we also see students experience trauma while they're with us. And so again, that's unfortunately, again, things that happen while folks are with us. And then the last three here are probably ones that, again, we'll probably see less often, but are still really important for you all to know that they're pretty common when we work with our students. Alcohol and drug misuse. So again, that could be alcohol, cannabis, other sort of drugs that, again, folks could either easily misuse or abuse. These concerns are really important to us, but again, oftentimes when folks, when these things arise in college, they might be situational, or they could be, again, a sign of a larger problem that either they're aware of or we need to help them get resources to get better. Body image and disordered eating, another very complicated scenario, again, pretty rare, because then body image and disordered eating is usually something people keep very, very private. But again, this is probably one of the more complicated things we deal with, because again, this can be a matter of life and death depending on how a student is actually maintaining their eating schedule. So, and then thoughts of suicide. This is always a surprising one for folks, but thoughts of suicide in college students is very common. It's also very persistent. So usually folks who have thoughts of suicide, or we might call it suicidality, those folks are likely going to have those thoughts for a while. So usually we want to get them into someone, to talk to someone, to sort of hash out again, do you actually, this is something that you might consider, or are you just thinking, or this is just a fleeting thought? And so, but it's very common and is persistent in our students. I know that might be uncomfortable for some, but it is unfortunately the reality of the kind of work that we do. So what happens when a student needs help? So the first thing that when you all are thinking about this is that usually you all are first eyes on these students, right? So you're probably going to notice that a student's behavior has changed, or again, one of those causes for concern pops up, or you might have a really strong relationship with the student and they come to you and say, this is going on for me. Somehow the behavior is noticed. I think your job, if a student behavior is noticed, is to talk to that student about that behavior, right? To say, oh, I've noticed that you have been late to meetings, or I noticed that you're having difficulty communicating with your peers, or I noticed that when I gave you this feedback, your reaction seemed to imply that this was a really big deal for you. Normally, when we talk to students, we want to approach them with, again, conversations about the behavior you saw, and how it may have been interpreted by you, but not necessarily about what the student is actually feeling. We want to stay as far away from saying you are depressed or you are doing poorly in academics. We want to say, this is what I've seen based on the behaviors. This is what I think it might mean. Is that accurate? And how can I help you if it is, right? If you get to a point where you notice that someone needs more intervention, so again, you're seeing someone come to you and they're like, I'm having suicide ideation, or I've been through this traumatic event, and you're like, whoa, this might be a little bit outside of how I can help you as a staff member, folks can submit their concerns to our office. So faculty, staff, peers, family can submit their concern, and I'll give you the link in a little bit about ways that you can get that information to us. And once we receive that report, this lovely team here, our Care and Advocacy program recently unveiled a new name, and so this is the new name, the Care and Advocacy program. One of these lovely folks will receive their information and reach out. Oftentimes, if you're working with the student, you might call us and consult and say, you know, this person is having this, that, or the other things happen in their life. So we often get calls about this person disclosed something really severe to me. So whether that's a Title IX situation, so sexual assault, or if that's like someone is not feeling well and is sick and they need help and support getting the word out to their professors. So there's a range of things that we might see, but we're prepared to, again, step in and triage and work with that student to get them resources. So again, this is the main team. So this is the advocate staff. And so again, Jessica in the upper left-hand corner, Drew below her, Ritu in the upper right-hand corner, and Lori below her. So this is the wonderful team. I'm sure if you've been around, you've interacted with these folks. They're wonderful. So once we receive that report, right? So again, you are going to go in and fill it out, and I highly recommend that you all spend some time looking at that form that I'll talk about in a minute. But once we get the report, we review it, we consult if it's not about something we can do or something we think we are the best people to handle, and then we take some sort of action. So every one of our reports that come through, if it's actionable, we try to move forward in either us taking action or making sure it gets to the right place so someone else can take action. This is kind of sausage making for folks. It might be interesting to you, it may not be. You don't need to necessarily know this information, but I always think it's important for you all to know what we're balancing when we're working with students. I always like to say students have a right to be unwell. And so there may be times where you submit a concern, we reach out, and students don't want our help. And so that is their right to be unwell. However, you know, if it's an opportunity for us to step in and intervene because they might be thinking about harming themselves or others, we might have to step in a little bit, but for the most part, our students have the absolute right to be unwell. So anyways, so consideration for actions, knowing that students have the right to be unwell, is thinking about what is the impact of the situation, right? So who's impacted, how many folks are impacted, how deeply impacted is the student that we're talking about? And then we think about what the level of concern is for us. So we use a few rubrics through our national organizations to help us define risk levels for each of the situations we deal with. And so I like to always think about a few different scenarios to kind of push this point home. A lot of times we'll see people who might be sad, right? Sad because they were in a recent breakup. They might be sad because they miss home. And that is a big deal for them, right? So the impact might be really high, but in terms of us, it might not be a very high level of concern for us, right? When we think about the differences in the ways that we might approach this versus someone whose parent has passed, right? Someone who is incapacitated due to you know, an accident or whatever. Those are going to be the ones that we kind of raise up on our level of concern for us versus folks who, again, might just be sad or might be homesick or whatever. So I think that's really important to know, that we think both about the impact on the student, but also for us, what is our level of concern. We also think about who has to know. You know, we can't always hold information within us, so we might have to let folks know across the campus. We might have to let, you know, we might have to do some emergency contacts, you know, based on the student's condition or what's going on. That's pretty rare, but we can contact their emergency folks that they've listed with us. And then lastly, and this is really important, and this is probably the one that most folks have difficulty with, is that we do have to balance laws and institutional policy. So again, a lot of times people are going to look at us and say, we need you to get this student help. The student absolutely has a right to deny that help. So again, we can refer and offer different services, but we have to be very careful to, one, not encroach on their ability to be here legally, right? So whether that be we want you to get counseling, but we can't mandate that. And so we can talk to them about that, but we also can't get them in trouble for not going to counseling. So it's really about building trust and rapport with the student, which I'll talk a little bit later. And so we try to balance, again, their individual rights, our policies and practices with what they think is best for themselves. And that might be nothing. And that just is, that's unfortunate, but it might be the thing. So what we value when we work with students. So we value their privacy, their choice. We try to empower our students towards self-advocacy. We always prioritize safety, and sometimes safety trumps, some of the opportunity for students to choose their own destiny with us, maybe in the real world, but maybe not with us. And then we try to collaborate with our students. So again, we don't try to make choices for them. We try to make choices with them. It's kind of how I like to think about it. Like we are a nice co-pilot with them, but we can't ever take the lead. And it should be something that happens with our students mutually. And so that's how we work with our students. And then lastly, we are very transparent. So if we get a report that comes through, we don't believe in secrecy. We actually don't think that that's a very trauma-informed approach. So a lot of folks might fill out a form for a student or call us about a student and say, I don't want them to know that I called. Well, it's really helpful for us for them to know who gave us that information. And so we can't promise you that we won't share who shared the information with us when we talk to that student, because it's really helpful for that student to have context so they don't feel like they're getting in trouble or they don't feel like they're being spotlit. But there's someone who genuinely cares and has a concern for you. And so we want to make sure that we build that trust with them as we work through some of the scenarios that might be open to them. So here's a little bit of a snippet about what DEMA students can help with. And I think this might be a really good list for folks, because there's some things, which I'll talk about in a little bit, that we're probably not the best place for folks to land long-term, but these might be a good guideline to some of the things that we can help with in the short term. So connection to COVID-19 campus community resources. So whether someone has COVID-19 and they missed work and need financial support, we can help them do that. People who are just in personal crisis and need support through that personal crisis. Academic support. So if someone's having difficulty in their classes based on some trauma or some crisis that they're dealing with, we can step in and help them navigate that relationship with their professors. Again, we don't email students. We don't email professors generally on the student's behalf. If a student is capable and can write to us, we believe we can help them build the skills to write their professor. They can usually copy us. But again, we try not to step in for the student. We try to help the student navigate how they can solve their own problem. Now, there are some caveats to that, but again, typically we try to stay and let the student handle the situation with our support. Financial concerns, including emergency funding. So we do have quite a pot of money for folks who are dealing with really difficult financial emergencies. And so we have our Student in Crisis Fund, but we also have access to some federal dollars this particular year that folks might be able to gain. We also have some new subsidies coming online this year. So we have a textbook subsidy and a housing subsidy that we're still working through the details. But we also have the childcare subsidy, which has been in I think over in the student ASUO kind of realm for a while, but it's coming over to our office permanently. Campus climate concerns. So again, if someone's experiencing harassment or bias, they can stop with us and talk about really anything, and we can direct them to the right place to share that concern. Off-campus roommate concerns or questions. So again, we get a lot of people who are like, I don't like my roommates anymore, or my roommates did this thing, I don't like that. We can help them navigate that and get to some resources for how they can actually support themselves and get themselves up out of a potentially harmful situation if they're with roommates that they don't trust or feel safe around. We also do direct referrals to physical and mental health resources. Again, we are not the counseling services, which is why I'm talking about their services in a little bit, but we can be a great place where they land to figure out if that's a great option for them, if that's something they want to pursue. And then ultimately, our job is to really connect people to general well-being resources. So we have great colleagues across the campus. We're not doing this work alone. And so we know other folks are doing really great programs and also might be a better fit for the student to land in terms of their long-term well-being. So how you can connect with us. So the easiest way, I think, is to fill out our community care and support form, which can be found at this web link right here. So dos.uoregon.edu/concern. Let's see if I can. I'll send out this presentation, but if you just want to jot that down, it's pretty easy to find if you go on our website. But that's the place where all of the information is recorded. We have a system in the background where those reports are then filtered and then assigned to different advocates within the Care and Advocacy program. You can also call us. Our phone number is listed below. During normal business hours, we have someone always maintaining the front desk. And so if you're like, I don't know what to do, I don't know how to report this, you can always give us a call and figure out, again, what to do next. And then coming soon, this is part of some of the changes we're making for next academic year. Students are going to be able to set up with meetings with our staff if they're looking for someone to debrief or to talk about their crisis with. And so they're going to be able to take control of that themselves and have to spend less time communicating through basically like a chain about their concerns, but they can go directly to our advocates and only have to share their story once. And so that's going to be really exciting for us. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about our campus partners over in the counseling services. Oftentimes people get our services mixed up with counseling services. So we don't do counseling. We do triage and referrals to our campus resources, off-campus resources, et cetera. The counseling services are actually where we actually send the majority of our folks with mental health concerns. So again, counseling services runs a 24-hour support and crisis line, which is found on the back of students' cards. But they can also just call the counseling services number, which is listed on the website. And again, someone will answer that phone all times of the day. It's confidential. They can get phone support right away with a mental health professional. Over that line and that crisis support, they can get in the moment care and intervention. They also, especially for folks who might be calling about a suicide ideation or thought, they can do safety planning with the people on that phone. So again, how do we, if you were thinking about doing something that might hurt yourself, who can you call? Do you want to, go talk with someone in person? Do we want to call Whitebird in or Cahoots in to come and support you? So there's lots of options there. And then this is really important for staff, but they can do consultation with you as well. So if you're dealing with a student who has an immediate mental health concern, someone came to you and they said, I'm suicidal, I don't know what to do, you can call the counseling center and talk with someone right away about how do I get this student the support they need right away. And so again, don't ever feel like you're alone. There's always someone there to talk with. The other thing counseling services does is they work with us and we coordinate care for our students. And they also do connection to resources and support through their case managers as well. So again, tons of support for students. You don't necessarily need to know that, but just know that you can call either the Dean of Students or the counseling services, and we can get you to the right place. All right. And one of the last things I'll talk about for the counseling services is that there is a free online training called Cognito. And Cognito, I can send out the link after this, but it's found on the counseling website. But this is the training that can help you support students who are having mental health concerns or who are struggling. It's an interactive training. I'm not sure if anyone on this call has done it already, but most folks who go through it feel like they've learned, again, things that are good to say, things that might not be so great to say in a situation that is presented in the trainings. And I think you get 3 scenarios that you work through. But I think the capacity building through Cognito is really significant. And so we're trying to get as many people to do that training as possible. It has our resources available. And again, it's super fun. It's kind of like some avatars talking. It's got audio. It's got real-time reactions in the faces of the student and in the person who's supporting the student. So again, you get to choose your own adventure. So you get to say, Johnny comes to you and says he's not going to show up for your next meeting. or your next whatever, and you get to say, oh, that's interesting, or I don't care. And like they just give you these options that you can click, and it kind of helps you understand, why a certain response might be better, or a certain response, again, might not be as great in that moment. So it's a great chance to practice. So I highly recommend, if you've not taken this training, to do that already. And it looks like Renee has. And so again, when we get to the question and answer part, Renee, maybe that will be a great time for you to chime in about the training. And then this is the way that you can contact them. So the phone number that's listed here is, again, the counseling services phone number. And again, this is the phone number that students can call 24/7 and get support. This is something that you can call. Their website, counseling.uoregon.edu, and this is their location on campus if you aren't familiar where they are, but they're housed in the health services building. Okay, and so last thing I'll talk to you about before we get into just a general conversation is our crisis intervention team. So this is probably the structure that most folks are less aware of, but there are a whole host of groups that are dedicated to information sharing and analysis of student concerns or threats that are happening throughout our campus. And so the team that I work with right now are the student care team and the Title IX case management team, but I'll talk to you specifically about the care team in a little bit. But the care team is, again, a place where we share student concerns. These are usually about behavioral concerns. They're not usually about threats to others, but typically they're going to be about behavioral issues that people notice and are based on the reports that we're getting. Our Title IX case management meeting is probably very self-explanatory, but this is for folks who might be a complainant or a survivor of sexual violence or domestic violence and are covered under Title IX. And so we meet to debrief and making sure that we have support for those students where we need it. The bias response and education team is a team that's intended to help students navigate through bias. It's not a adjudication group. So again, they don't take cases and say, this is exactly what the university needs to do. There's a lot that goes into that, particularly First Amendment rights around bias. And so most of this team's job is to help us navigate campus climate issues and find a restorative way to get to a good place with the student and with the campus. But again, it's really kind of a function of education towards making the campus a better place for students to be here. And then last but not least, is the behavioral evaluation and threat assessment team, also known as BETA. And so BETA is a group that deals with really significant threats to campus and harm to self or harm to others. And so this group meets, I think, ad hoc, depending on cases they get. So again, they're going to be people that UOPD is there, Dean of Students and Student Life is represented, Counseling Services, UOPD. Lots of folks are trained on some nationally recognized assessment tools that they go through if folks say that they are feeling threatened or harmed. And so again, that team is always operating. They don't really get a break, just like the student care team and the Title IX case management team. We're always working. But that's a little bit about those teams. And you can find more about them on our Dean of Students webpage. So our student care team, again, I think is probably the most relevant to this team today. But again, this is an interdisciplinary departmental problem-solving group. And so we work with multiple partners across campus to figure out how we can better support students who kind of extend past our normal levels of care. So again, we might be talking about folks who are leaving the academic endeavor for mental health concerns. This can be someone who might have had a significant physical injury, someone who might be actively suicidal. So again, we're going to see folks who, again, our services might not be able to provide them with what they actually need. And so we work together to figure out how can we do some wraparound support for those students. And then lastly, this is just a list of the folks who are on that team. And so we have eyes and ears and we have information to share. For folks who are student affairs geeks, you all know that there were a couple of milestone cases in the late 1990s and early 2000s that really helped us understand the need for information sharing across the institution to mitigate harm to the student, but also risk to the institution. So again, we have folks in academic advising, accessibility education, And you can read the list there, but again, we all come, we all listen, and we all sort of are a brain trust for how we support students moving forward based on concerns that are presented in the particular situation. So I think that is the end of my presentations, and I'm going to stop sharing and then open it up to either questions or thoughts folks have as you think about supporting students this year. Oops.
Can I just say, wow, Jimmy, you all do like have such a heavy lift and responsibility, and you do it so flawlessly. And I really appreciate the perspective, the positive framing on everything. And just thank you. That's just what I want to say. Thank you for sharing this and just giving us a little bit more depth to just how you all approach it. And I just think the process is so important for us to understand.
Yeah, I think it's really important to know that, you know, our students are full adults and they have, again, agency. And so I think, you know, many of these students might be struggling. And so our job is, again, I like to tell people, we are not their problem solvers. Like, we are not stepping in and acting like parents. We're stepping in and acting almost like a coach, right? To say, here are some good opportunities, and here are some things that if you choose not to do, it might impact you in the future. So it's easier maybe to address it now. It's up to you. And so again, I think we are the best tools in getting the student support and helping them understand that, you know, getting support should be normalized, you know. But again, for me, it's always about sitting with that student and saying, what do you want to do? How can I help you make this better? And sometimes, again, my hand is forced because of institutional policy, but oftentimes I can get someone to want their own help and to build their help-seeking behavior. That is my goal, because again, they're not going to be in an environment where people are going to be clamoring over them and giving them support their whole life. We have to help them build skills to, again, identify when they need help and who they feel that they can trust to go find that help with. So that's kind of how I see my job. And in there are going to be lots of crazy scenarios and a lot of crazy things that happen. But again, it's about, again, making them people who can find help when they need it. And if we step in, again, I see this a lot from folks. They want us to step in and act on that student's behalf. That only helps them in that scenario, doesn't help them in the future. So that's kind of how the model we take. And so, yeah, we're shoulder to shoulder with the students in that process.
Well, and it's just so empowering because this is based on research. Like, we know that help-seeking behavior is like the #1 thing that's going to help students and people in general respond to things and just do what we call this life, right? As chaotic as it is. And so that's very much aligned with a lot of our research. And we actually, this time, actually right now, we are launching a psychosocial assessment that's measuring help-seeking behavior. And so I think in the future, it'd be really kind of cool to get students' consent. If we see low help-seeking behavior on that assessment, how can we then connect those students, you know, to know that there is this connection point to help them like work through and build those skills. And I just love it. So thank you so much for your service to our campus.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point. So one of the things we're trying to do this year that we, you know, since I've been here, is we're trying to find ways also into our minoritized populations that don't normally come to us for a number of reasons. Could be the staff makeup, it could be they don't trust systems. A lot of our indigenous students, like that I've worked with, are very they have not been benefited often by red tape and structure, and so when they come to me, they're usually pretty wary. And so, or they have to meet with me. And so we're trying to find ways to get into communities, like I said, our indigenous folks, our Black students, our LGBTQ students, our, you know, folks who identify as differently abled. And so we're trying to, again, go to the communities in which they're already existing and offer our services there, because we are often finding that those folks might not be making it to us through the processes that you all see. And so we're just trying to find ways that we can, again, go out there, build that trust, and then help them, again, at least with us, know what we're about, and that they can come to us and we can be a part of helping them solve whatever problems they bring to us. So, but yeah.
Any other questions for Jimmy? It sounds like we're all just here, just learning, and like, I mean, you've just given us a wealth of resources, and it's always good to get reacclimated. Are there any direct questions for Jimmy and on this topic? Well, we appreciate you, Jimmy, and really, I'm just really excited to go through this process. I'll be uploading this and sharing it more globally as well, so those who couldn't make it today can just really hear about like just the process. I don't think a lot of staff and a lot of people understand in our community like what we have and the connection point. And I appreciate you going through the misunderstandings of like what you do and what you don't. And then I just really appreciate the positive framing again to echo that. I think that's really important. And I appreciate the reminder that we need to do better outreach and that you all are committed to that. And I think that that's a good equity framework. So thank you. Well, with that, I guess we'll end. Go ahead, sorry.
Oh, I was going to say one resource that I'll give out is we have basically a help folder. So like resources, normally we give you like a paper copy, but it's virtual. So we have basically an electronic version, but I'll send that out along with this presentation to Renee so she can share it out. But it's basically a folder that you can keep on your desk, and it basically gives you a breakdown of scenarios and who to call for each scenario. It's a very helpful guide. It's updated each year. And so I'll send that link out to you all as well, along with the presentation.
Thank you, Jimmy, so much. We